President, Mr. Ombudsman, Mr. Professors, dear colleagues. Now I would like to present our outcomes and my outcomes as well. I try to separate these issues from each other. First of all, this is a Central European program. Therefore, as leader of a research group, it was my task to prepare a kind of questionnaires to the participants. Here you can see the receipt, the ingredients as a cooking method of this project. How I try to establish kind of questionnaires. It's first of the thing that I based the first step of this activity on the research outcomes of Professor László Fodor. He's a Hungarian professor of the environmental protection. However, he graduated here in the University of Miskolc and received his PhD title and habilitation here, but he is a professor of the University of Debrecen. He wrote his habilitation monograph in connection with constitutional law and environmental protection. And in this monograph, he compared European countries' legislation considering this topic. He focused on 9 factors. These 9 factors was an essential part of our questionnaires. After that, I also considered a new constitution. It was the Hungarian constitution, but why? Because this is maybe the youngest or one of the youngest constitution here in the European Union. And therefore, a question was that what is the situation in a constitution which was adopted in the 21st century? What is the situation in this constitution considering the protection of future generation interest and environmental protection? And I could find numerous aspects which, for example, were not mentioned or examined in Professor Fodor's comparison research. Therefore, I could find some new institution, and these new institutions, they also inspired me when in preparing the questionnaires. And of course, there are some subjective elements. That is the EDE factor, referring to my Christian name. I try to give a some personal to this. It's worth noticing that I have some ideas about the tendencies. Of course, you can also find these subjective elements in connection in the questionnaires. And there was a questionnaires. In my opinion, some parts of this questionnaire was useful and usable. But during the research, during our meetings with the professors, the members of the group, of course I recognized that some element was okay and acceptable, but some element was maybe not as important in our research. And here you can find a list via which at the end I could compare the outcomes of the research groups. Therefore, this outcome, the fields of comparison at the end, it was something different from the questionnaires. I think it's a typical thing during a research that there is a kind of hypothesis about the interesting issues, and that is the end. Here you can see the issues. I think there are some groups, however, among them. The definition issues. What is the situation with the definitions in the constitutions? Because it's a field of representing our special national characteristics. Another issue connected to the role of the different bodies, institutions, In this research, we focused not the classical one, parliament, government, and so on and so on. Of course, they have a great chance, competence to create a better surrounding for environmental protection and protection of interest of future generation. But in this research, we focus on other actors: constitutional court, ombudsman, maybe the heads of state of republics, and so on and so on. It's worth noticing that maybe except one country, but in other countries, their role, the heads of represent, they were not as important. In constitutional law level, maybe in other political level, they could achieve different things. But in my opinion, it's a personal assessment, of course. But constitutional courts ombudsman is a different issue. The right to the human rights issue or fundamental rights issue, it was also quite important, and in a kind of connection to this issue, the values issue, and besides the task, liability, and so on. They are maybe the main groups of our comparative aspects. However, there were some interesting sub-issues. Financial sustainability. It means that when we take into consideration the interest of future generation, it's not only a financial sustainability, but future generation consideration. It's worth noticing. It means, in my eyes, the financial sustainability. As to the ombudsman issues, as far as I know, maybe in all countries we can find a kind of ombudsman. The names are different, maybe the competencies, tasks are different, but a similar institution can be found. Numerous of them dealing with environmental questions. Another interesting aspect was the right to a healthy environment. We could find not in all, but in numerous constitutions, this institution, but maybe with different names, with different contents, and so on and so on. It's a quite nice field, the other rights questions, whether other human rights are in constitution which are usable to protect environment or not. We could find special sui generis right to water, for example, from the Slovenian constitution, or especially interesting question, the collision among these rights, what is the situation, which is more important in comparison with other rights, and so on and so on. They are typical question, I know, for the human lawyers. Our members drew my attention that public participation questions, they are quite important, and they highlighted. It's worth noticing that at the beginning of my research, I did not consider it as important question. That it's important, therefore I was forced to put it into the center of the outcomes. The liability issues, in my opinion, typically focus on it means that intra-national actors, but in my opinion it's a great question how to deal with international actors' liability, task, and so on and so on. How can a state deal with these actors? Because it's obvious that beside domestic actors, state, citizens, businesses in a nation, in a country, the international actors nowadays, their effect on environmental issues more important, or more, the effect is greater. Therefore, this is a question. Maybe we could not find a correct answer, but I think we have to deal with this issue, and we have to pop the question. And at the end, this is the values issue. It was important question. For us, Hungarian, in our previous constitution, it was before 2011, we already have the right to a healthy environment in our previous institution, and we have this right to a healthy environment in the young one. But there is a huge difference between the two Hungarian constitution. The previous one, was a so-called value-neutral constitution. And the new one is a value-rich. This is my category and denomination, value-rich. And my question was whether this value provide an opportunity to reinterpret the old institutions, or this context. Maybe it's also provide an opportunity to create some new institutions, maybe in the practice of ombudsman or constitutional court. Therefore, in my opinion, this is an opportunity. However, in numerous other countries, this question was not maybe a topical question, and maybe numerous of the members, maybe they do not felt that's the importance of this question is not a problem. Of course, this is the reality. It's a research only, but in my opinion, it's also an important. It can be an important when there is a change of constitution. Maybe an old institution can be part of reassessment. This is the good practice initiatives of my colleagues in the research group. Here you can see this. I don't know what is the exact number, but 1, 2, 3, maybe 14 areas, and you can see which areas were important according in the opinion of our colleagues. And you can see that maybe the most interesting part of according to the authors of this research group was the role of ombudsman. They could find good practices or refer that maybe it can be interesting, and they try to highlight it, the practices in their countries that. It's good that they are dealing with these questions. You can see the other question. Maybe it was the role of the constitutional court. They also refer to this, or the definition issues, maybe in their constitution in connection with the natural resources. It's not a coincidence because as to the determination of the natural resources in the constitution. This category expressed national characteristic. It was quite important, for example, our Slovakian colleagues, because they have special things in connection with water and the cross-border issues. Therefore, it represented the national characteristic, and numerous of our colleagues refer that it is a good thing. And so on and so on, and there are the other issues as the definition of future generation, or the other definition questions, the sustainable development, and the right to a healthy environmental good practice or best practices also was part of their assessment. And as to the lege ferenda proposals, where to change the constitution or the constitutional practice, you can see another assessment. For example, the definition issues, they are absolutely, how can I say, number one issue as to the lege ferenda proposals. However, also the role of ombudsman and the rights issues are important. And as a conclusion of this calculation, if we summarize this, the most relevant question or affected question by the authors was the role of ombudsman. It was 9 cases when they referred to the topic as good practice or the lege ferenda proposal. It's interesting, in my opinion. Their ombudsman, sorry. And there are other important questions, definition questions, and the right to a healthy environment. However, researchers noticing that sometimes the questions which were not affected, they can be also interesting because, as new tendencies. And wow, this is the general reporter, that is me. Sorry. Crazy ideas, of course, in connection with good practices. Therefore, this is my opinion. Of course, it's not the opinion of my colleagues. First of all, which is quite important, maybe as a kind of general message, but that the countries, they have agreed freedom in the formation of the terms, concepts, legal institution concerning protection of future generation and environment in constitution. Of course, numerous of us, of course, except Serbia, they are member states of the EU. Therefore, of course, there are directions, but and we have to transpose these directions into our national legal order. But please do not forget that there is not a kind of a requirement to put them in constitution. And that is a situation also at international level. As to the Council of Europe, human rights part of this issue, in the main document of the Council of Europe, of this European regional human rights system, the right to a healthy environment cannot be found in the original document. However, of course, there are other human rights which should be considered in connection with the environmental protection. But the conclusion is that we have freedom how to protect environment via constitutional law, and do not forget that constitutional law is the capstone of our legal order. Therefore, I think it provides a great opportunity to draw the attention to this topic and provide a quite strict power to change, to develop, improve this area. And some reflections as to the definition issues. Of course, I could find these natural resources, national characteristic aspects of the constitutions as an important and as a good practice. It was quite interesting me the financial sustainability issue, that in some countries constitution and or constitutional practice consideration, for example, in the procedure of adoption of national budget, the interest of the future generation. I think it's a quite interesting area. And in my opinion, we should deal with this issue in detail later, maybe. Another interesting issue, of course, it is the role of the Constitutional Court. And in Hungary, our situation is the same, of course. The Constitutional Court is a court of law. Point. Or we can say that. But as to the environmental protection, when we try to prove, for example, the non-derogation principle, it's kind of characteristic maybe of a court of fact. Maybe it can be also a potential direction of development if a country wants. It's not a compulsory element that you have to change your constitutional court without changing the constitutional court system. Your constitution is bad. No, it's not. Of course, as I mentioned, this is the freedom of the country and its nation. But maybe it can be also a kind of field of development. It's a kind of question only at this moment. However, in my opinion, it has to be used together with the principle of non-derogation principle and maybe the precautionary principle, because who has the right to prove this or not, or the task, to prove during this procedure is also interesting. Therefore, it's interesting. Role of ombudsman. The question is whether a green ombudsman is better if we have, or the general ombudsman can solve everything without a sui generis ombudsman. This is a question in Hungary. In the Hungarian constitution, the answer is I think it's clear. Maybe the question is whether is it good for other countries or not. However, another interesting issue, the competencies and the actions towards, for example, the private sphere, because it's typical. We know the answer why the ombudsman criticized the public authorities. It is the essence of the ombudsman institution. It's clear. But as I previously mentioned, sometimes the private actors, especially at international level, they have a kind of, neutrality, or and in numerous cases they are not part of the critics, and maybe it can be also an opportunity to open the competence of the Green Ombudsman as well in connection with this. Right to a healthy environment, it's play a central role in numerous Central European countries, is what clear. Also, there are interesting tendencies in connection with other human rights or fundamental laws, that there is a kind of development I mentioned as a greening of other human rights. We use it right to health, for example, and so on and so on. Of course, it's also a great question. For example, the question of the right to voter. Is it necessary to be a sui generis right to voter or not? Or we can provide a similar protection with other general rights? It's a standard question. Liability issue. It's obvious that, for example, the liability of state is essential, is a central question. But nowadays, there are other, in connection with citizens, business actors, international actors, this is the EDE factor, that I try to emphasize that please never forget at the international level. And last but not least, the constitutional value, as I previously mentioned, it's especially important question in connection with Hungary. And my delega ferenda proposal issues. I think that it would be nice if we could improve the development of the operation of the modern states into the in connection with these three directions. The question is that the national positioning on the issue of the population growth in the nation. I think this is a central question, because this is a central question also in almost all environmental question. How many consumers? And we have to do something with this question. The greening of state structure and operation. This is a kind of reform of the state and maybe the legal order, because we use the classical legal order since 19th century. And maybe our legal order is not proper, not enough. I don't know what is the correct word to use, but maybe we also should think of the modernization of this structure. And another important question that, in addition to the greening of the state, what can we do with international players? Using the constitutional powers, countries should define the environment, natural resources, future generation in the light of their national specificities. As to the future generation, how a country imagines the reproduction of its own society as a community with a common identity. What does it mean? There is an opportunity in the constitution and or in the constitutional practice to define the future generation definition, because it's not clear, however. And the lega ferenda proposal, it means that, for example, in a country, similar to Hungary, in which we have this value-rich constitution, that another interesting element of the future generation or the transfer, not only the planet to the future generation, but maybe our common heritage, because maybe our common heritage, for example, and sorry, as I mentioned, but in Hungary we have a value-rich constitution. The Christianity as a heritage, it's important in our culture, and in my opinion, but I could read a similar approach from your presentation, Mr. Ombudsman, that in connection with Christianity and environmental protection and the interest of future generation, there is also a kind of strong link. Therefore, as a kind of transfer of cultural heritage to another future generation, it can be part of the project. Therefore, that is the reason why I'm on that a common identity transfer is also important among the generations, from an environmental protection perspective as well. Okay, financial budgetary sustainability. It's quite important. Another issue in connection with the definition, there's a resilience. Somebody mentioned that maybe it could be also interesting, and I share his opinion in connection with this. I mentioned the Christian values and heritage as to in the constitution in which it is protected. If in Hungarian constitution that it's obviously an expressis verbis value, in other countries' constitution or in constitutional practice, because maybe the constitutional court itself can give a more an importance to this issue. Therefore, it's an opportunity for them to use it to, in Hungary, to reinterpret the old institutions and so on and so on. The emergency powers questions, because nowadays maybe this decade is the standard crisis decade. Who knows? COVID, now Ukrainian war, economic crisis, and so on and so on. And in this context, maybe we should also taking into account the environmental protection issues, but maybe as to environmental issues in connection with other crises, in COVID, in war. You mentioned also the Ukrainian war, and we do not know to calculate with its effect to the environment. Therefore, I think it can be also an interesting, not only interesting but important question. Role of the given authors, the Budget Council I previously mentioned in connection with the sustainable financial sustainability. It can be also a kind of proposal, the lege ferenda proposal, how to develop institutional side of the future generation protection. Constitutional court, as I mentioned, maybe this court of fact aspects, the strengthening in connection with environmental protection. It can be, maybe revolutionary institution in this case. However, it's worth noticing that I'm not an absolute fan of the quite progressive constitutional court. It's worth noticing, but sorry for that, but maybe it can be a kind of solution how to develop our legal order, how to green the greening of the state via constitutional court. In my opinion, however, the Hungarian constitutional court is quite active in this to develop and improve the institutions. And the sui generis green ombudsman question, I do not want to repeat myself in connection with this. Another interesting issue, that in the literature we can find that the polluter pays principle is quite important. Maybe the regulation of, in the constitution or in the constitutional practice, it can be important. I accept this because it's also express a kind of liability importance, especially of the consumers and the citizens. But besides, I would like to deal with the system operators, and sometimes they are the international players and others. And it's not enough, in my opinion, that the consumers, they have to pay the bill of the use of environment, but nobody want to change it. Why? The system operator why to change the system if the consumer pays the bills? Therefore, maybe the operator also should pay the bill of a bad or not effective environmental use. Maybe I'm absolutely certain that you can find similar initiative in the literature. I could express it in this way, and in comparison with the polluter pays principle. And that was the end. It was a great opportunity to me to work with you on this project. I hope that we can, in a certain form, continue this cooperation. And now I'm absolutely curious what is the opinion of Professor Bartosz Rákóczi from Poland in connection with our book. However, we could send it the manuscript at this moment. And thank you so much for this. And that was my end words.